pleased to be here with my friends and to be able to discuss what I think is a fascinating topic. As suggested by J.B., not all, or not even very much necessarily, that we discuss has to be or considered as hate speech when there's disagreement. I'm going to speak to the other side of this, and that is how I perceive that Latter-day Saints have tried to guard their own hate speech. How have we come at this matter ourselves, and how we view or speak of others disrespectfully? Without question, the wedge between Mormonism and traditional Christianity is driven very early. Joseph Smith walks out of a grove of trees, and whether he did or didn't see God the Father and Jesus Christ may matter most, but the fact is, he also came out and soon said, among the first things he said is, I've learned for myself Presbyterianism is not true. And before too very long, you have a revelation of the Doctrine and Covenants using language like this: the only true and living church upon the face of the whole earth. It seems to me that during the administration of Joseph Smith, but probably even more so in the lengthy administration of Brigham Young, the LDS faith basically establishes itself as over against other people. And I would say that the way we often defined theological terms, or the way we often spoke about spiritual matters, frequently reflected that we speak, if they're here, we must be over here. That lasted a long time. Personal experience. I grew up in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, spent most of my first 18 years there. And I was preparing for full-time mission. I began doing a lot of reading because I was frightened about how I didn't want to embarrass the church. And I was reading a good bit from the New Testament and the Book of Mormon. I came to my dad. Let me tell you, my dad was raised LDS in Louisiana. He was a very bright man, and I think had a good understanding of the gospel of Jesus Christ. I asked Dad this question. I said, Dad, I've been doing some reading and some thinking. What does it mean to be saved by grace? His response was, well, son, we don't believe in that. I said, we don't believe in that? He said, no. I said, well, why don't we believe in it? He said, because the Baptists do. You see, that speaks volumes as to how, for a very long time, Mormonism defined itself, even at the lower levels, as over against others. If they're here, we must be over here. As J.B. indicated, we look upon that period of the 1950s as a kind of golden era, for a golden age for Mormonism, in the sense, in addition to what he described, it also began, the latter 50s and into the 60s, a tremendous success in terms of missionary work in the United States, particularly California and the northwestern states. President David O. McKay, the president of the church, the 9th president, the one during the 50s, president of my boyhood, seemed to represent a kind of universal brotherhood that I don't think we had known as well before. He was a loving and open and bridge-building president of the church. He personally found himself regularly engaged in close friendships and relationships with persons, leaders, pastors of other faiths. One of the more interesting things that took place during his administration was, of course, that moment in our past where in 1958, Bruce R. McConkie had published the book, first edition of Mormon Doctrine, identifying, of course, with a tone, as many of you would know, a tone that wasn't exactly a welcoming tone. but introducing the concept of great and abominable church as defined specifically as the Roman Catholic Church. That didn't go over well even in Salt Lake City. And it didn't go over well among some church leaders, including David O'Mackey. He insisted that before the book could be brought back out for a second printing, second edition, major changes would have to take place. About 1,100 changes were made. In 1978, under Spencer W. Kimball, the church released a statement that I know that at BYU at least, teachers of world religion at BYU have used over and over and over. I'll just read a couple of paragraphs from that. It was in 1978. The first presidency statement was entitled, God's Love for All Mankind. The great religious leaders of the world, such as Muhammad, Confucius, and the Reformers, as well as philosophers, including Socrates, Plato, and others, received a portion of God's light. Moral truths were given to them by God to enlighten whole nations and to bring a higher level of understanding to individuals. Consistent with these truths, we believe that God has given and will give to all peoples sufficient knowledge to help them on their way to eternal salvation, either in this life or in the life to come. I believe in some ways, in many ways, that statement became the beginnings of a kind of broadening that would take place within Mormonism by the 1980s in terms of perspective toward other faiths. Something as simple as Latter-day Saints being called upon not to call their friends or neighbors not of our faith Gentiles is very important. The movement, for example, from Mormons calling those of other faiths Gentiles to calling them non-Mormons or non-members to being encouraged to call them our friends of other faiths. That may not seem terribly important to you, but it implies something taking place at the highest levels. Elder Russell Ballard of the Quorum of the 12, a number of years ago, speaking in General Conference, this is a little bit lengthy, but I want to read it because of what it says about a turn in direction that I think is a very important turn. Occasionally I hear of Latter-day Saints offending those of other faiths by overlooking them and leaving them out. This can occur especially in communities where our members are the majority. I've heard about narrow-minded parents who tell children that they cannot play with a particular child in the neighborhood simply because his or her family does not belong to our church. This kind of behavior is not in keeping with the teachings of the Lord Jesus Christ. I cannot comprehend why any member of our church would allow these kinds of things to happen in their homes. The Lord expects more from us. Parents, please teach your children and practice yourselves the principle of inclusion of others and not exclusion because of religious, political, or cultural differences. I believe it would be well if we eliminated a couple of phrases from our vocabulary. Here's where he begins talking about this. Non-member and non-Mormon, for example. Such phrases can be demeaning and even belittling. Personally, I don't consider myself to be a non-Catholic. Or I don't call myself a non-Jew. I'm a Christian. I'm a follower of Jesus Christ. I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and that's how I prefer to be identified for who I and what I am, as opposed to being identified for what I am not. Let us extend that same courtesy to those who live among us. It may be that the administration of Gordon B. Hinckley, from about 1995 to 2008, was the period where leaders of the church, particularly the president of the church, did more to encourage Latter-day Saints not only to guard their speech, but to broaden their perspectives. I went back a while ago and just sat down and typed up portions of every General Conference address where Gordon Hinckley addressed the Latter-day Saints, and noted those sections of the talk where he spoke in terms of those of other faiths. And during those years, President Hinckley was very vocal about using words such as the following: Latter-day Saints must cease being so parochial, so narrow, so holier than thou, so arrogant. And he went on and on and on about this. And he was the one that began to say, I think more than any president of our church, reach out, build friendships, build brother and sisterhood, build unity between you and your neighbors, especially in terms of issues in our society that just require people with similar social and moral values to work together. Let me read something from President Hinckley that is, I think, is very interesting about this concept of only true church. The Lord said, this is the only true and living church on the face of the earth, with whom he is well pleased. And then he says, I didn't say that. These are his words, they're not my words. The prophet Joseph was told that other sects were wrong. Those are not my words. Those are the Lord's words. But they are hard words for those of other faiths. We don't need to exploit them. When I was serving as Dean of Religious Education at BYU, after about 7 or 8 years into that assignment, I received a phone call, and I think the month was in May. It was Elder Boyd K. Packer. He said, Bob, can you recommend some good books on Christian history? I said, sure. Why? He said, I want to know more about the history of the Christian church. Well, I sent him what I thought were 5 nice one-volume histories of the Christian church. Brief, but I think well done, well written, and well accepted among the Christian congregations. I remember him calling me in August. No, in July, because they have July off, and I remember him saying he's going to do most of his reading in the month of July. He called me and said, I've read all of those, I need you to send me some more. But he said, but I want to say this. This is Brother Packer, I think. Many of us remember Brother Packer. He said, I think we must find a better way to describe our friends of other faiths than apostates. In a General Conference address and in an Ensign article, the Ensign being the church's magazine, Boyd Packer said the following: speaking of that period we've called the falling away, or the apostasy, the flame flickered and dimmed, but always, as it had from the beginning, the Spirit of God inspired worthy souls. We owe an immense debt to the protesters and the reformers, for example, who preserved the Scriptures and translated them. They knew something had been lost. They kept the flame alive as best they could. Many of them were martyrs. Later in the Ensign, he said, the line of priesthood authority was broken, but mankind was not left in total darkness or completely without revelation or inspiration. The idea that with the crucifixion of Christ, the heavens were closed and they opened again in the first vision is not true. The light of Christ would be everywhere present to attend the children of God. The Holy Ghost would visit seeking souls. The prayers of the righteous would not go unanswered. Final thought. The movement among some of us to become involved in interfaith relations, interreligious dialogue, I remember very well, early in that process, Richard Mouth, at the time president of Fuller Seminary, coming to Salt Lake City and saying to several leaders of the church, and I was there, "Let us help you." And they said, "What do you mean?" He said, "I think what Mormonism needs is a Vatican II." My perception is that didn't go over well. But there was something about what he said that I think did get people's attention, because what has come as a result of our 15-year dealing closely and intimately with our evangelical friends has been a much more careful look at ourselves, asking them all the time, how do we come across? What are we just missing here? Help us understand how to express ourselves more effectively. Thank you.